Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Retrospectives, the podcast where we look at old games through modern lenses. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined by my co-host James Twirlings once again. How are you doing today, James?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty great. This episode is really exciting for me because the game we're going to be playing, or have played rather, is one of my favorites. So I've been really excited to start discussing it today.
Yeah, I got stuck for a while, which we will get into later. But first up, I want to thank everyone who listened to the first episode of our podcast and gave us much needed feedback. It's a bit rough in parts, so hopefully today's episode is even better. Just to re-summarize what we do here on the podcast, basically, James and I independently play an old game, and we do not talk to one another about it at all until today. So we've both played Banjo Kazooie today. James chose that one, and we haven't shared a single word apart about it, and we've constantly had to tell each other to shut up.
That's a bit of a lie. There's been one or two very brief spoilers, but we have tried to keep it to a minimum. Yes,
there have been one or two slips, but on the whole, we have been disciplined and not talked about it. So we are both eager to get into it today. We want to replicate the discussions that we often had about more modern games live on air. So as I said, this week we're doing James's game, Banjo Kazooie. Last week we did my game, Doom. So, James, what I'll do is I'll hand the reins over to you since I'd never played Banjo Kazooie until today, and you can give us a basic rundown of what Banjo is all about.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So, Banjo's a 3D platformer that was developed for the N64, probably roughly 20 years ago now, so it's quite old. It's a 3D platformer that had a de-emphasized focus on platforming and combat, where the main game involves running around big open levels looking for things to pick up and collect, which allow you to get to more levels that allow you to pick up more stuff. When you play the game, you take control as both a bear and his bird, and they control as a single character that use kind of their strengths and weaknesses to form cool moves that you can do. I'm just going to give a quick spoiler warning before we begin. Although the story of this game isn't particularly important, we will be discussing everything about the game. The story begins with Banjo's sister Tootie being kidnapped by a witch, and you spend the entire game trying to get her back. So we chose this game because we thought it would be interesting to discuss how 3D platformers have changed over the years, because apart from the notable exception of Mario Odyssey last year, there haven't been a whole lot in recent times, so we thought it'd be a good way to look back and see how things have changed since then. With that in mind, almost every design in this game was made to emphasize like a feeling of exploration and like a sense of wonder that you get when running around the levels, because to me the main gameplay loop is throwing yourself into the level and then running around scouring every nook and cranny for jigsaw pieces that are the main collectible in the game and that allow you to get further and further through the levels. Because of this, a lot of the traditional platforming and combat is a bit toned down in order to make the levels a bit easier. So Patrick, my first question today is, did you like that they did this in order to emphasize the exploration, or did you find that the challenge was a bit on the lower end for your tastes?
So you're basically asking, in making combat and platforming less important, did it get too easy?
Yes.
I don't know about you, but for me, the earlier levels in the games were pretty straightforward, but the last couple of levels were kicking my ass. Particularly the last level in the game, the Clockwood. I died a lot trying to scale that massive tree, because if you fall all the way to the bottom and lose a lot of health. But what I was going to say is I don't think the difficulty comes from the, intrinsic difficulty of the platforming. It more comes from the poor controls.
The poor controls. That's interesting, because I basically finished the game in 1 to 2, maybe 3 sittings because I enjoyed it so much. And one of the things that stood out to me was that the controls still hold up to this day. I still felt that my character did exactly what I wanted to, and that I had more than enough options at my hands at all times to be able to do whatever the game threw at me.
So I strongly disagree. I think the controls are horrifically bad. Like, the double jump is all right, but when you do a combat move, like a combat roll or the punch, you're kind of
Yes.
locked into an animation and you have to move forward while you do it. And there's a big, long, ugly pause between taking a particular action and doing anything else. But the real problem is the camera, because the camera is kind of locked to particular axes. With modern platformers, when you hold down the analog stick, it rotates around smoothly, so you can find the exact angle you want to have your character at. With Banjo Kazooie, you're locked into I don't know, maybe eight directions. Whenever you tap the analog stick, it moves you over 15 degrees or 25 degrees or so, which made particularly the curvy platforming sections an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, so for me, those sections, when you're traversing them, there's a button that you can hold down that centers the camera behind your character, and that made those a lot easier for me. But I do agree, the camera at modern standards is absolute garbage, right? You'd have no fine control over it, and oftentimes I found that some of the scenery would get in my way.
I think it's strange that you thought that the controls were good. Stuff like maybe it is mainly just the camera, but stuff like there's a high jump that you can do on specific platforms.
Yes.
And you didn't really know where you were going with the high jump because you couldn't easily see what was coming up next. So there was a lot of guesswork involved with using that high jump.
I usually found that the level design... So in the game, there are these big green circular pads, and then... Well, throughout the game, you unlock an assortment of abilities, right? That you start off with a few, and then you go through the game and you find more as each level progresses. And then about 2/3 through the game, you have every ability. So one of these is the big circular pad, and you stand on it and you hold the jump button, and it springs you up quite far. I found that every level that utilized that mechanic, when you were walking towards it, you got a big, you were able to take in the whole scene, and so you could see where you had to go once you got to it. But yeah, once you were on top of the pad, the camera angle was usually quite limited. So I guess you had to rely on seeing it before you got there to do it.
So to return to your original question, I thought the game was a perfectly appropriate level of difficulty, although there was a major spike towards the end.
Yes.
But I don't think the game is trying to present I guess a difficult experience. So I don't hold that against it.
Against it? Yeah, right. Yeah. Because, to me, the entire game is exploration, right? It's running around through the levels that are brightly coloured, have themes. For example, the main game is split up with a big hub world, and then throughout the hub world there are portals to smaller worlds which have tightly designed themes. For example, there's a snow level, and there's a bunch of underwater levels, and stuff like that. And each level kind of consists of a bunch of big obvious landmarks and little smaller ones for you to run around in, and there's various challenges which reward you with items, right? So to me, most of the joy is running around and looking at everything. Did you find that engaging?
So here's how I feel about the running around and the exploration. It was very enjoyable on my first run through a level, because I agree that the levels are very aesthetically pleasing, and it's almost and you get to tackle them in whatever order you choose because it's just a big open world. Yeah. So I'd go from place to place doing each cool thing, and then once I'd done a lap around, I'd be like, oh, I still have this many jiggies left, this many notes left, and that's when the fun started to drop off for me, because while I enjoyed the initial exploration of the world, combing through the world looking for bits and pieces was pretty miserable for me. Okay. It turned what was originally a joyous experience into a tedious chore. Exploration is fun when you want to do it, when you're compelled to do it because you need to hit a certain jiggy and note percentage. It stops being as fun to me. I don't want to play spot the pixel or spot the hidden door that I can bash open to get another 5 notes. I want to explore the world, and then once I felt I've given it a good crack, I can leave it. But I never felt that way with Banjo Kazooie.
Yeah, so in the world there are 2 primary collectibles, the jigsaw pieces, which allow you to get to new levels, and these music notes, which there are about 100 in each level with 10 jigsaw pieces. And the music notes, you also need a certain amount to progress through the game. So the way they work, however, is once you pick them up, they're added to your score for that level, and upon leaving the level, it saves your high score for the level and then resets the notes. So if you want to be the most efficient that you have to get every single note in the level before you leave, or when you come back, you have to capture every single one again.
That is a huge problem.
Yeah. So I think that it has its ups and downs. I think there are some benefits, although for the most part, it's tedious.
Name one benefit.
So one of the problems, well, not problems, but one of the design choices that they've made is specifically making the enemies in the game quite easy, because that allows you to easily traverse each level and doesn't get in the way of the exploration. With the notes, once you get up to about, because there's 100 notes, and if you die, they reset as well. So once you get to about like 85 notes, every time you see an enemy, you're like, oh god, get away from me. If I die, I have to do all that again. Which, for me, works up until the point where you actually die. If you don't die, then that tension is really rewarding for me. But if you actually do die and have to do all of that again, it is a pain in the ass.
I mean, I just would prefer to not do it again. I mean,
yeah,
I know, there's tension there because it's boring and terrible to have to do it again. But I mean, you can say that of literally dying in any game, any game ever, right? Yes, dying is frustrating, but giving you a sense of frustration when we previously agreed that the point isn't to create a challenging experience doesn't make any sense to me. The point is for it to be this joyous world which you explore. Why are there even enemies in the game, for Christ? Just like if I'm playing an exploration game, forcing me to retread my footsteps and remember exactly what I've collected and what I haven't is not fun. And it happened to me and I hated it and I was super frustrated.
Okay. See, for me, I had played the game before, so when I was going through it, I pretty much got every note in my first go of the level every time, so it never was an issue for me. I missed maybe 12 notes in the entire game, just because I did die on the final level, and the final level is very big, and going through that again to get the notes was just not worth it for me. Overall, I know that the future game and the remake of the game actually removed the need to recollect all the notes. In the Xbox One version of Banjo, once you've collected a note, it's collected forever. But one of the points I wanted to lead into is that at no time during collecting the notes did I feel that they were hidden in particularly hard to find places. They were mostly out in the open, which I think is the correct things for the designers to have done in order to reduce that kind of pixel hunting frustration that you're talking about. It's not entirely gone, but I think they did a good job of minimizing it for what it's worth.
Part of the problem is that the percentage of notes you're required to collect on each level is extremely
really high, right? Yeah. Once I got to the end game, because I had collected pretty much everything as I was going, I would never came to a point where I had to go back. I never had to backtrack the entire time when I played. So that was a big thing for me. But I did notice that there's 100 jigsaw pieces in the game to collect in total. You need like 96 of 100.
You need 94. 94 of 100, which is just ridiculous. Like, it's just... That is such a high bar to clear. Even the notes, you need 90% of all the notes.
For example, Mario Odyssey came out last year, and there are 830 collectibles in that game. But I looked it up last night, and you only need 120 to finish the game.
And it's about 300 odd to get the proper ending, though.
Yeah, not even half to get the true ending. Yeah. I think that's somewhere that if we saw a new Banjo game today, I think that would be changed. I don't think you would need quite as much completion percentage to finish it.
It's not just the completion percentage either. If you go to a level, if you return to a level, everything is reset as if you hadn't done it before. Most notably, there's these things called Jinzos on each level. There's 5 somewhat hidden creatures on each level spread out across the map, and you've got to find all 5. And if you do, you get a Jiggy. If you return to a level, you have no way to know, if you don't remember every level perfectly, whether you found the 5 Jinzos on that level before or not. So, because they're all there, and you don't know if you got the Jiggy or not until you find all 5 Jinzos. So, at one point, I was trying to get my final Jiggies. I returned to a level, and I'm like, I don't know if I've done them or not. I don't know if that's one of my 2 missing jiggies from this level. And that was similar to the notes, right? Like, if I've done it, just get rid of them. If I've collected it, let me know I've collected it in some way. Don't just have everything sitting there for no reason.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that is definitely a sign of the game's age, I feel. If that game was made to today, absolutely you would not have to collect them again once you'd already collected them. So, one of the other things that I liked in regards to the notes was that they weren't particularly hidden anywhere. The entire level design of the game hands itself really well to not being overly complex. To me, it feels as if many of the levels are quite small intentionally, to help prevent the player getting lost. If they were larger, you could probably spend a lot of time running around aimlessly. And to me, the small size, along with the fact that the levels are littered with big set piece landmarks, is really, really beneficial to the game. For example, I think in almost every level, there is a huge landmark right in the center to help orientate the player. Like in Clanker's Cavern, which is an underwater level involving a big metallic shark. The big metallic shark is always facing the direction of the entrance, so it's always really easy to kind of look to the center of the level and know where you are. And there's always...
I was just going to say I agree that the small level design means, you can find most of the notes on the level without problem because, it doesn't take 3 years to traverse from one side of the...
Yeah, there's no notes that are hidden in some, invisible little tiny gap.
I mean, there are some notes that are in some odd places that you have to find.
Yeah, but they're not particularly fiendish,
most of them are reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only truly hidden things were the life up upgrades.
Yeah, and those are non-essential to finishing the game, which I think is really good. They made the hardest things optional, and I think that lends itself well to a good way of designing challenge for the game.
I mean, that being said, there was still a couple of levels where I did have to wander around looking for notes to get to 90%. It's not like I naturally found all of them automatically. Yeah. So I think that for the most part, the notes are in reasonable locations, but not all of them.
Yeah. And so that small open level design kind of extends to all facets of the game. Even the tutorial, so if you compare tutorials from modern games to Banjo Kazooie, modern game tutorials are quite linear, like they first teach you how to move, and then how to jump, and then how to do this. Whereas the tutorial in Banjo is actually open and you can do it any way that you want, and I think that kind of right off the bat encourages that sense of exploration that the game is going for.
Sure, I mean, I guess that makes sense. The fact that you can go about things in any order, good. There is some sense of linear progression to the levels. You sometimes have to unlock certain things to unlock further things, but I'd say about half of the jiggies are available from the beginning of the level, and the other half become available as you complete certain tasks and quests.
Yeah, I think I found that when you first explore a level, one of the first things that I generally did was go around and build up a big checklist of things that I need to do. And then the next half of my exploration was finding the answers to those questions. Like, right at the start of the desert level is a big tree that says he needs water. And so immediately, okay, I should keep my eye out for something that provides water. And I think that those kinds of questions are front-loaded to the beginning of most of the levels. So you make that big list in your head, and then you go around trying to solve the problems.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I do think that the best ones were the jiggies with a little kind of quest attached.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems I had with the game eventually was the fact that because the entire gameplay loop is just collecting bits, it's just collecting notes and jiggies, the, I guess, narrative motivation to do it is very lacking. Like, it's a very gamey sort of game. Okay. When you had to do a little sort of progression, and I think the best example of that is in Click Clock Wood, which has several of these where you... So to introduce Click Clock Wood, which I think is the best level of the game by a significant margin, it's 4 instances of the same level, a big tree, but in different seasons. So different things are accessible in different seasons, like certain bits will be underwater, certain bits will be frozen over, depending on what the weather's like. Yeah, I enjoyed getting a jiggy the most when I got to do things from season to season, because it felt like I was doing something. It felt like I was doing something that was justified. I wasn't just finding a jiggy in order to open a portrait in order to get more jiggy. It felt like I was accomplishing a quest.
Right, so in Click Clockwood, you enter the level and you're in this little hub that leads into 4 doors with an icon above each door that represents a season of the year. And the first one that is open is, I think, spring, and then you slowly unlock the rest of the seasons as you go. So one of the quests that Patrick's talking about there involves a baby bird that in the first season is just an egg, so you hatch it out of the egg, and in the next 3 seasons you help to make it bigger and to grow, and then in that final season it gives you a reward. Whereas a lot of the pieces are just kind of lying there for you to pick up, or instantaneous feedback, whereas this one takes maybe 15 to 20 minutes of working towards it to get to.
Well, they're either lying there or you do one thing and you get the jiggy.
Yeah.
So, and that's not very far removed from it either. It's more interesting when it's a multi-staged thing.
Okay, because actually to me, when I was a kid, I had very fond memories at that level, but actually replaying it, one of my least favorites probably. I did enjoy the kind of story progression, but having to do the exact same platforming challenges on the tree 4 times over was really frustrating and boring to me.
Yeah, you know how I mentioned briefly that I had quick save scummed at one point?
Oh,
that was a level where I quick save scummed, yeah, because I was dying so much to the platforming.
From falling off the tree?
The camera made me want to smash my controller against the wall. I just hate the camera, and I don't have a problem with the double jumping or anything, but there were too many times where I'd try and do a jump and I'd miss the edge of a platform by a millimeter. I'd fall to the bottom and I'd lose 3/4 of.
Really? Okay, so that's interesting to me, because to me the camera was the least bad in that level of all the levels, because most of the platforming in that level is carved into the side of the tree, which kind of artificially forces you into an almost 2D perspective, because it has a reduced requirement for 3D platforming. You just move left and right because the tree has platforms carved into it. So kind of the trunk of the tree acts as a wall you can't go past, and that limits you to left and right movement, which is
but you've still got the bit with the tree house. There's lots of little bits around the outside.
Yeah, sure.
You're putting yourself in serious danger.
Because to me, a lot of the most recent 3D platformers, Mario Odyssey, Galaxy, etc., do this thing where they lock your perspective to 2 dimensions, because it's a lot easier to design difficult platforming sections in 2D than it is 3D. With 3D platforming, I feel that there's a gulf in the middle. It's really difficult to have moderately difficult platforming, where it's really easy to have very easy platforming because you have so much freedom of movement of the controls. But if you then require precise jumps in 3D, it's a lot more complex to get the inputs right, correct?
Well, I mean, I think most of the difficulty in the game comes from the bad camera controls. If you fix up the camera controls and, the automatic tracking is annoying as well. You fix those up, the platforming becomes significantly easier and more forgivable. I don't know. I think that the frustrating thing about the platforming in this game isn't intrinsically the platforming. I think it's fine. It's the fact that the camera is so bad. So they fix up the camera, it's probably a much more pleasant experience.
Okay, sure. No, I can agree with that. So to continue discussing difficulty, I guess, one of the things I noticed is that the game gives you options to increase the difficulty for more advanced players. Early on in the game, you get access to a move that allows you to walk a lot faster, but you have much less fine control over your character. Essentially, because your player character is made up of 2 characters joined together, right? You're a bear and a bird. There's a move that the bear flips over onto his back, and the bird uses its legs to walk around, which goes a lot faster, jumps a lot higher, but it's harder to have that kind of precision control. So what I found is, once I got a little better at controlling my character, I spent the majority of the game using that walking style, because it made jumps a little bit harder.
The noise it makes as it's walking around.
It's amazing, right? You love it.
It's so bad.
How
it's
did
like
you feel
when all the characters talk.
You didn't like that? Because
terrible. I had to take my headphones.
You don't?
I don't know how you can enjoy that sort of verbal diarrhea. It's terrible.
Yeah, because all the characters in this game talk with lots of grunts. They don't talk in dialogue. They just make kind of grunty noises constantly.
Every few microseconds.
Yeah, and I guess I played this game as a kid, right? So I have that as a fond memory of being kind of silly and funny.
Yeah, I mean, it fits in aesthetically with the charm. I just found it annoying.
Yeah, sure. So how did you feel about how cohesive the design was in terms of that aesthetic? Because it's got
the aesthetic? The aesthetic is one of the best parts of the game.
Yeah, it's got this very European fairy tale feel to it, right?
It's very stylish. It all fits in. It's very bright and colourful. In a lot of ways, there's a problem with 3D games from that era in that they look incredibly clunky because it was in a time before 3D graphics were properly rendered and detailed, but it didn't bother me at all with Kazooie because of how it was very much a stylistic looking game and it was stylistically cohesive.
Yeah, so like it's got that fairy tale inspiration. Heaps of the characters talk in rhyme the whole time.
That's whatever. Like it's.
Did you listen to the music in the lair very much? Did you notice what the theme was?
I don't know what you mean. No.
So for the music in the game, the music essentially consists of a single tune that the instruments and the pitch of the instruments change depending where you are. So the notes will be the same, but it sounds different. Like if you're underwater, the music sounds muted. If you're in this dark alley, it swaps from this bombastic tone to this really like quiet and kind of like tense sounding music near the Halloween level, for example. And one of the key things is that the theme is actually Teddy Bear's Picnic, which, ties in, like you're playing as a bear, right? Like, so they play Teddy Bear's Picnic throughout the entire game, varied with different instruments.
I didn't know that, but that does make sense.
It's cohesive, right? Like every section is the same, but with that different instrument styling. And that's not just limited to the hub world either. Every level is like that as well.
So I will point out that there's no separate volume slider for the music. So I actually had to listen to most of the game with my headphones around my shoulders because I found the music extremely annoying.
Really?
15-second music loops are just not particularly nice to listen to for hours on end. Like, it's fine. I don't think the music's bad. It's just annoying to listen to it endlessly. And I appreciate all the subtleties and all that, but come on. Give me a volume slider. Let me turn it all the way. So if I wanted to listen to the game on a decent volume, I had to listen to the music, and that was too much for me to handle. So I had my headphones around my ears. I'd put them on every now and then. I couldn't handle it for very long.
Yeah, so that's in stark contrast to me, who after I finished the game spent the next 4 days humming the soundtrack to myself.
Don't get me wrong, it's catchy because after I listened to it, I was stuck in my head. But it's just not particularly compelling. Like I don't have a problem with it. It's just not really my thing.
So as for we go into more the aesthetic side of things, how did you like the way that they kind of the story's very simple, right? But I think they did a good job of building the villain up a little bit by having her. She essentially talks shit to the player, throughout the entire game. She just interrupts what you're doing with some little insult, and the whole hub world has statues and pictures of the villain just to keep you reminded why you're actually there the whole time.
Honestly, I was pretty apathetic to all that. The thing that dominates my mind when I think about Banjo is that it's a game about collecting notes.
Okay.
There's no real rhyme or reason to it. You're just collecting notes, collecting jiggies, so you can eventually confront the villain. And she's a bit of fun, I guess. I mean, she's saying rhyme and everything. But I didn't really care.
Okay.
I wanted to, as I was doing each level, I'm like, I need 90 notes and I need 8 jigsaw pieces. Why do I need that? So I can open more worlds with the jigsaw piece and open more doors.
Yeah, it's the classic get stuff so you can get more stuff thing, right?
Yeah, so the overarching story couldn't really care less about. I thought they might do something clever, like have 2D be in Gruntl's body, because the whole idea behind the story is that she's trying to switch bodies, and I thought they might have already done that, but in the end, it's not clever at all. It's just
So
it's just
getting
a
to
game show.
getting to the end, how did you feel about the last two segments of the game? So once you finish the final platforming level, you're immediately greeted with this big portal, which takes you to a giant board game. And the giant board
it's like
game
a game
is,
show.
it's like a game show, and each square on the board presents you a question, and the question asks the player about something that they've seen in the game. For example, it'll show you a picture and ask you, which level is this? Or it'll make you play a mini game again from the game, or it will
A much
give
harder version of the minigame, for the record.
Yes, and it will give you a voice clip and say, which character is this? Something like that. And then you need to get, and you lose health every time you get something wrong, and it gets sent back to the start if you die. So did you enjoy that? I thought it was some...
I enjoyed it apart from the death spaces, because I got right to the end, and then it asked me a question like, how many squares are on this board? And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Oh, I got that one right. First try, it was like, I'm a god.
Well, I was right at the end. I got
complete guess though,
the starter.
Yeah, because there's squares that if you get them wrong, it instantly kills you, and there's two right.
Great design, Banjo. Apart from that, it was fine.
Yeah, I will admit I died like a couple times on the game board, but it's fun. One of the things I was wondering was one of the spaces on the game board asks you trivia questions about the villain, and throughout the game world, there's an NPC you can talk to that provides you these facts, and without knowing about the game board, it would be very easy just to completely skip this NPC's dialogue. Did you do that?
I listened to the first couple. I'm like, what the hell is this? And then I stopped listening to it.
Yeah, because I knew the game board was coming up, so I specifically went out of my way to read all of them so I wouldn't get trapped.
Honestly, I guessed correctly most of those anyway. I think I got one wrong. You could pretty much figure it out.
Yeah, okay. And so after you beat the game, but it's fun, right? Do you still think it's fun at the moment?
Yeah, it was all right. I didn't really have a problem with it. I admit I struggled with the music question for reasons I guess are pretty obvious.
Bad taste in music. I think that's the reason.
But it was fine. I mean, the only bit which I thought was particularly clever was when one of the questions is in regards to their voices, and Gruntilda calls them disgusting voices. Yeah. But when the question is about her voice, she says fabulous voice, so...
It's pretty obvious who it is, yeah. Well, I mean, the whole game board is against you, right? Every time you get something right, they boo you, and every time you get something wrong, it cheers,
It was alright. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a trivia test. It is probably a good way to
end the game.
If it's a game about exploration and it's asking you about the characters and everything, sure.
Yeah,
but
I think...
how important is it remembering how a particular character's name is spelled with an O or an A? I don't know. It seems a little irrelevant, but I think it's fine.
I think it really well tied into kind of being the end of your exploration. So after the game board,
it's a fine thing.
So after the game board, you go into the final boss fight, and I'm interested to hear your opinions on that because it's
let's talk about before you go into the final boss fight, because I know that you had collected all of the jiggies that you needed, or all but two.
Yeah, I got through every single door immediately.
Yeah, so when you finish the game, you have 90 required, maybe even. So I had 80.
I had 98 at that point.
Sure, so I had 80, so I had to go back through all of the levels again and find a lot of the jiggies that I missed, and this was I disliked it. It was frustrating having to go through all those levels again. Some of them were not too bad, getting some of those jiggies, but some of them I was just running around a level hoping to find something, and it sucked. So once again, the high bar and percentage for completion is really frustrating. I just want to duck back a bit because there was a level that I didn't have many jiggies on, and there was a reason for, and didn't have many notes on, and there was a reason for it. And
Can I guess? Can I guess?
Yeah, you can guess.
It was Clanker's Cavern, right?
Correct.
Yeah, the third level in the game.
Oh my god.
The third level in the game takes place in a big waste disposal facility, and in the middle is a giant metallic shark that's apparently the main antagonist's trash compactor, right? And it's a primarily swimming-focused level.
And swimming is the worst.
Before he even discusses this, I'm going to agree, because I know these swimming controls are not great. They are
They're terrible.
probably the one part of the game that I actively dislike.
I stopped playing the game for 2 days.
Yeah,
I hated it so much. There's a bit in this where you have to go down very deep, right? And there's a fish down there shooting up bubbles of air because it's got an oxygen system. And in a normal game, if you got that bubble of air, it would replenish your oxygen to full, right? Not Banjo Kazooie. You get 1 bar out of 6 of your oxygen back. And picking up the notes on the bottom of there while trying to pick up the oxygen bubbles, it's just terrible.
Yeah, I agree here.
I will say the flying controls aren't much better either, but the swimming controls are in a league of their own. They're just so bad.
Absolutely the worst part of the game for me was that little bit down there.
So having to go back and do some of these levels was I just did not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But the game forced me to, because you need 94 out of 100 jiggies to actually fight the final boss. I asked James if I had to do it, and he said yeah. Oh.
I mean, the final boss is important, right? It's gameplay, and it's pretty unique gameplay to the whole game too. So continuing that discussion on Clanker's Cavern, the underwater level, I specifically made sure I got everything, so I never had to go back in there. I didn't. Once I got past that little bit you explained before, where you have to go right down to the bottom, I didn't find it so bad. Like everything else was fine. Yeah, because you don't have
to be underwater anymore.
Yeah, but that bit was actually awful.
Yeah.
So,
terrible.
If that's your least favorite level, let's talk about the ones we liked the most. Because for me, the best 3 levels were the ones in the center of the game. So there's a swamp, the ice level, and a desert. And the thing that sticks out to me about these 3 levels is they're a little harder than the earlier ones. They don't feature any swimming, which is a big plus. And they're all small, compact, and I finished each one 100% in 20 minutes each. It was short, it was quick, and the challenges you had to do were fun and silly.
I mean, to me, the best level by far is Click Clockwood, and it's not close. That level had the most going on narratively, which is why I enjoyed it. There was a thing where you had to plant an egg in a thing, and there was a bit with the bird, there was a bit with the squirrel, there was a bit with the beaver. There are all these bits where you were interacting with them in different time periods.
Yeah, so for example, the beaver, you start off and the beaver's underwater and there's a rock, and the rock is blocking the beaver's house and it can't get in. Next season, summer, the water level has gone down, so you can destroy the rock for the beaver, which then in the next season means the water level goes back up again and you can go into the house and visit it for a reward.
Because it's too steep a slope otherwise to get up there. And those were the things most. I liked the ice level because the snowman was an awesome thing to climb.
Yes,
it's just cool how it was a interesting thing to climb with lots of little bits to the snowman, with lots of little collectibles all over it, depending on how high you went, and it just kept going up. It was huge.
It's huge, and the thing that allows that is the double jump, which if you fall off a really high place, you can press double jump pretty close to the bottom, and then you won't take any damage. And I think
as long as it's not too high. If you're too high, you will just fall.
You'll go into free fall, and then you die. Yeah. But it's pretty forgiving, and I think that works to the game's advantage.
I really disliked the flying though. I don't know if you enjoyed that, but that
it's
was
very
my problem
fiddly.
with those levels.
Yeah, exactly the same as the swimming controls, basically, but a bit faster. It's really hard to aim your character in a specific direction, and often the game required you to do so. There were these big snowman enemies with a big cross on their heads, and you had to, when flying, dive straight into those crosses to kill them, but it required, enough precision that it was actually pretty annoying. It was just trial and error. It wasn't too interesting.
And the way you climb is you press A, which consumes one of your feather collectibles, and then you go up a set amount. But that's frustrating. You don't have fine control over it. It's like every time you get too low, you have to press A, and then you jump up into the air, and then you're doing twirls trying to hit something. It's just... You just don't have fine control over it, which is frustrating when certain areas need fine control.
While we're on the topic of that snow level, there was one jigsaw piece that stood out to me in particular, which is a race against a big polar bear on a toboggan, and you essentially have to race it through all these little checkpoints that you have to hit in order to continue. Now, you do the race twice, and the first time, it's pretty easy. The second time took me forever to beat it. How did you go
That's
with that?
so weird. I did on my third try. Yeah, I don't...
Really?
I don't,
okay.
Yeah, because you told me that you were about this race level as it was like this big thing, and I'm like...
Well, I found everything in the game quite
understand.
easy, and then I got to that race, and I don't know.
I think
there was something about
there's some
one of the
weird
jumps.
rubber banding. I think.
Yeah. I had to resort to body blocking, like standing in front of the polar bear to slow it down in order to win. Because I would always start off very far ahead, and then it would catch up, and I'd lose.
So on each time I attempted it, the first two attempts I was right behind. Third attempt I beat him. I fell behind fairly significantly in all three bits. Like I missed a flag and had to run back and do it. And I think that there must be a rubber banding thing.
Yeah, I guess maybe that...
you fall behind at the right point, which I just did coincidentally, he slows down for you to catch up and overtook him. So, yeah,
okay.
it was...
Maybe
it was
that's why I struggled, because at the start I was better than Patrick.
But yeah, it was very, very much a non-event. I didn't find any individual thing in the game too hard except for the final boss fight.
Okay, there are some mini-games which I didn't find
the
hard.
mini-games on the game board I found hard. The normal mini-games, though, so...
Yeah, the hardest mini-game is probably the one with the crocodile.
Yeah, I lost that a couple of times.
Yeah, so essentially you're in a big room and there's two different coloured blobs, and the game will say, collect red ones, and so you collect red ones, while there's an NPC also collecting red ones.
It's like switch. A Mario Party minigame. It's just,
yeah, it is. And that was fun.
The hardest minigame was when I had to spell Banjo Kazooie backwards, and I had like 50 seconds to do it. I was like, is this some sort of sick joke?
Yeah, there's a big level with letters on the floor that you have to like butt stomp in the certain order to progress.
Honestly, yeah. But the final boss fight, I died like 15 times.
Yeah, same. It's really hard, and there's like 6 phases to that fight. So essentially, you're fighting the big witch, and then phase 1, she's diving at you on her broomstick, which, you step out of the side of the way, and then you hit her a few times when she's vulnerable. It's interesting to me because I think that kind of design holds up now, right? There's a boss, and it does a bunch of moves which you have to avoid.
Yeah, honestly, it reminded me of Dark Souls. Like, yeah, it's not that really far removed, but it is not like Dark Souls, is that the controls are terrible. Absolutely terrible, particularly in that final bit. So on the final bit, there's a move in Banjo where you shoot an egg forwards, and the very final bit of the game is you have to shoot eggs forward into slots of a statue. There's 4 sides to it while taking enemy fire. Like you get a small moment to breathe where you can do it, but you have to be constantly dodging back and forth. The problem is the control to shoot an egg is on the same stick that your camera's on, and you have to be facing in the right direction to shoot the eggs already because the speed at which you turn is very slow. So you're fighting the camera at the same time you're trying to face the right direction. At the same time, you're jabbing the analog stick up and down to shoot the 3 or 4 eggs required. It's a complete nightmare. Like, it made me legitimately angry how stupidly set up that fight was.
That's so funny to me because I found that super simple. If you hold the button that centers the camera behind you, you can essentially use the left stick to aim. So we're playing on an emulator, right? So on the N64, there are 4 directional buttons that we instead had bound to the right analog stick. So when I was playing, I would be using that button to center the camera, use the left analog stick to aim, and then, it's fine for me. What I did find was pretty obnoxious in that fight was the third phase requires you to be in the air and to do those dive bombs similar to the Snowman. It wasn't hard. Like, it's basically impossible to die in that phase, or I thought it was, but it's just so hard to hit the target consistently, so it just takes ages and it's
would
boring.
Be, once again, to me, the controls are getting in the way of having time. Like, That was my overwhelming sense behind this game. It's like there's a good game here. It's just I can't get at it because the controls are so terrible.
Right, okay, because I found that generally just moving back and forth was really responsive. Double jumping was fine.
Yeah, but the camera was terrible. And
Terrible,
all
yeah.
the combat moves sucked.
Well, the
egg
combat
shooting
moves were
sucked.
specifically really forgiving. They actually, when you attack, they've got lots of active frames, like you're attacking for like a full second in which you can't be hurt and the enemy can be hurt. So
Yeah, but that's not responsive though. That's the opposite of responsive. You're locked into this attack going in a particular direction.
okay, that's interesting. Because to me,
Whereas if you just did a single punch and then I could move again, that would feel far more responsive to me. Instead, you're locked into these long attack animations where you can't change direction.
yeah, and that's fine to me. So if we go back to that idea of Dark Souls, a lot of the moves in that game have this kind of you attack and then there's like a split second where you're vulnerable. And to me,
Yeah,
that's
but you get to
good.
choose the weapon you have. Like you can choose a big heavy weapon, or you can choose a small fast weapon.
Yeah, and in Banjo you can choose to shoot enemies from afar. You can choose to use the
Oh,
peck,
I didn't.
the roll.
I barely did that because it felt so awkward for me.
Okay. Because for me, the attack that I used the most was the one where you jump and then you do 3 little pecks with the bird.
Yeah, that was far and away the strongest move.
Yeah. And then I guess there's the one where you stand in place and swipe your hands. I pretty much never used that. But I mean, the combat was super simple, right?
Yeah. So the thing to me is that the combat was a waste of time and not fun. The platforming was largely not super fun. It was alright. There were some bits I liked better than others, but the imprecision caused by the
camera
caused
made
a lot
you.
of issues for me. Yeah.
So with that in mind, overall, did you like the game?
Yeah, like so basically I would recommend Banjo Kazooie. I think that at the end of it, when I reflected on how I felt, I did have a fun time. But there are so many little things that annoyed me about the game.
Yeah.
The controls, the camera, the high percentage collection, the fact that if you left a level, you had to collect stuff again, the fact that you couldn't easily keep track of what you'd actually done on a level and what you hadn't done on a level. All of this stuff contributed to it being a very frustrating experience for me, even though I did enjoy a lot of what I was doing. I enjoyed the exploration. I liked how the levels were filled with stuff and weren't spread out in this enormous way. I can see why people want this sort of game to be updated in a modern way, because if you fix those issues, I can see it being a brilliant game. But I just got very, very frustrated.
So, yeah, from what you were saying, it seems to me that the game is flawed. But the whole idea of having a super collection focused game could be done better, right? It's not as if the genre is so heavily flawed that it couldn't be improved. If someone was to do a game like that today, like make Banjo 3, God hope, they could do it and fix up those issues, right?
So returning to the idea of like games as exploration, a game like Banjo will never be my favorite, because the thing about the exploration in Banjo is that it's almost held. You kind of go everywhere. You don't have a main part and then optional exploration.
Yeah.
The game is you should explore everywhere and do everything. My favorite games with exploration are ones that have a main path, and then if you so choose, you can explore, because that feels more, I don't know, it feels more like I'm exploring if I don't have to do it to finish the game. Banjo feels like because the whole game is going everywhere, you have to go everywhere. And that's how I approached each level. I did everything on every level that I could because I had to, not because I wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, for me, kind of just the first few moments of the level are the best, right? Because you don't really have a goal. You just run around, you do what you want, and then you get to the point where you're like, okay, I've done all this stuff that I wanted to see. Now I have to go tick these boxes. And I guess that is the point where it starts to dip in fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like the freeform nature of it, but the fact that you have to do everything anyway means that you're just choosing the order in which you do all the things. You're not choosing which things to do.
In terms of the kind of like comparing the shapes of the levels to modern day, if I played a game like an open world game today, the levels would be way bigger than Banjo have less stuff to do in them. And, like, to me, I really liked the open design that was really small and compact. I think that was very good. I think that, to me, open world games are flawed, and while this game isn't completely open world, the open level structure really lends itself to that small design.
There's no wasted space. It's all very dense and compact and well.
Yeah,
put
you
together.
go anywhere
without it feeling super cramped. You still have distinct bits in each level. I completely agree. And yeah, open world games with a bazillion things on a minimap spread out everywhere that take 10 minutes to go from one check marker to the other, that's not a good gameplay experience. You're just wasting people's time.
And like half the time in those games, the collectibles don't feel like they do anything. Like, I don't feel good when I pick stuff up in other games. Or in Banjo, everything I pick up has a purpose and helps me.
Well, that's not true. The only thing you really care about picking up are notes and jiggies. The other stuff is largely.
I had a very low egg count throughout the entire game because I used them all the time. So
okay, I barely ever use.
Yeah, and the gold feathers, which make you invulnerable for a short amount of time, I used that a lot as well.
Barely ever use those too. I didn't really use any of the, so they were just window dressing.
Okay.
Every now and then I'd get low and I'd pick up 8 and I'd be fine, but on the whole, I just ignored them. All I cared about was getting the notes and jiggies as I progressed through the levels. I mean, why do you even need to turn invulnerable? Why do you need to shoot eggs?
I don't think there's a mechanical situation apart from a couple of specific platforming challenges that requires it. But I just used it on some enemies because I could, honestly.
Okay, sure. I just never felt the need to.
So, from us discussing this, something that's become pretty clear to me is that I really like the act of picking things up just by itself. Like, I think that's fun. It's not difficult, but like the sound effects and just the running around and the freedom you get is really like good feedback for me. You don't feel the same though, right?
I mean, it's fine, but when I'm collecting collectibles in games, I far prefer if there's something more tangible. It's like some sort of direct reason to be collecting these things apart from just progressing. So the thing about the gameplay loop of Banjo is that you're collecting notes in order to open doors that contain jigsaws, and you're collecting jiggies to use on the jigsaws to open the worlds, to collect notes to open the doors. That's the entire game. That's why you're collecting.
Yeah, it's a big circular treadmill, right?
Yeah, if I'm playing a game like, I don't know, a more modern game like Prey from 2016, I think, I'm collecting hypostims to upgrade my character, make them more powerful. If I'm playing Doom, I'm exploring and collecting ammo to shoot the enemies or health to get my health back. If I'm playing Hollow Knight, I'm getting charms to make my character more powerful, and health upgrades, and mana upgrades. There are reasons to explore and find these things that give you tangible upgrades. With Banjo, you're collecting so you can collect more. And to me, that's a lot less satisfying.
So you like the health upgrades in Banjo? Because that sounds like the same thing that you just discussed, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the health upgrades in Banjo were the best and most interesting thing to find. Most of the times when I found them, I did feel a sense of accomplishment. Not only because they gave me a tangible, because they were deviously hidden, a lot of them. Some very, very clever places that were not obvious at all. Some of them were easier to find, but when you found one of the ones that was very cleverly hidden, you felt like you'd earned.
Yeah, because the main difference between this game and, even Mario 64, which came out at the same time, is that the platforming is easier because the whole game is picking stuff up. That is the game. So I guess it really, like, whether you enjoy this game or not really heavily hinges on whether you like that feedback from the items or not. Yeah, so I pretty much have hit every point I wanted to cover. Was there anything else that you stood out to you?
There's just one more minor thing, another minor complaint, and I have many of them. The draw distance is really bad. For a game about exploration and finding collectibles, you have to get really, really close to the collectibles to actually see them. So as you're looking down from these high points, you can't actually see the outline of the level. Even when you're within about 20 meters of things, you can't see them. You have to be practically on top of them to see them. And I understand that's probably a restriction of the Nintendo 64 hardware or whatever, but when you're trying to find the last couple of notes and you can't see them till you're right on top of them, yeah, that's annoying.
So you're telling me you don't think it adds to having to scour every nook and cranny of the level?
What did you like the terrible draw this
No.
time?
Not
Okay,
at all.
good.
That is something that would, again, definitely not be seen if this game was made today.
Yeah. What else? Skip the terrible cutscenes because I tried to skip them and couldn't.
You can skip them.
You can skip them?
You can skip them. You just have to press a combination of buttons.
Okay, because I was pressing lots of buttons and I couldn't skip them. I'm like, God damn it.
Yep, you can skip every conversation just by pressing 3 buttons at the same time. But I'm glad I didn't tell you because the conversations are great.
I can tell you didn't tell me.
So yeah, I guess we've hit everything we wanted to cover. So final summarized thoughts for you?
Good potential, frustrating experience. I'd like to see them take a crack at it again to get rid of all my many frustrations to see if it's a more enjoyable experience at the end of it. I still never think I'll be in love with these sorts of games because of the compelled exploration as opposed to optional exploration, but I'd probably play it and enjoy it.
Yeah, for me, the game's great at fulfilling that exploration fantasy. You're lost, well, not lost, but you're wandering around in this whimsical world, collecting and picking up stuff. Because, even the little sounds each item made when you pick them up were pleasant to me. So I could just run around picking stuff up for hours on end, honestly. And, the only thing that I really have to complain about is maybe they could have included some harder platforming sections, but otherwise I love it to death, yeah.
All right, well, that about wraps it up for today. We'd like to thank you once again for listening to the second episode of our Retrospectives podcast. It was a lot of fun talking about this, and you got to hear a very serious difference in opinion between James and us. We're very eager, once again, for any feedback or criticism, whether it be about audio quality, we're talking about, our point of views, or even if there's anything we missed. So if you'd like to drop us a comment, please send us an email at retrospectivespodcast@gmail.com.
Or visit our website at rspodcast.net.
We will continue to release episodes fortnightly, with our next episode being about an actual good game, unlike Banjo Kazooie.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be doing Prince of Persia Warrior Within from 2004. This was one of my favorite games growing it up, and I think it's definitely a standout title from the PS2 era.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
So until then, thanks for taking the time to listen, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.